welcome back to the Blue White Breakdown. I'm Bob Flounders, joined by Greg Pickel and his dog Lola, who you can't see or hear, but trust me when I tell you that she is very close to Greg right now and just behaving. Greg, look, we're going to talk a lot about Penn State football and James Franklin's Tuesday's news conference, which he was asked a lot of questions, and it was, he talked about his seniors, and he talked a lot about the challenges of just having the season. At one point, Greg, he was asked, right now, do you feel like it was worth having the season just based upon the injuries and, dealing on a daily basis with a pandemic, trying to coach a team in a pandemic, social distancing, all the protocols. Penn State's really passed them all, Greg, with flying colors since this started back in June. They've had very, very few, positive tests. And we don't know if they've had any because it's been the entire athletic department that's kind of released the numbers, or the athletic department's made a statement like every 2 weeks, but they haven't really mentioned any specifics as far as players or sports. But it's not just the football team, but all the athletic teams up there have done very, very well with regard to the pandemic and protocols. And Greg, the reason I bring it up is, we're just learning that the Ohio State-Michigan game is now off because of problems continuing in the Michigan football program with regard to positive tests. And, one of the great games in college football will not be played this year. I don't know what it means for unbeaten Ohio State, but Greg, doesn't it kind of speak, even though Penn State is 2-5, they've won 2 in a row, they're playing better, but doesn't it make what James Franklin and the program have done with regard to protocols, doesn't it make it even more amazing that they've been able to get to this point?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question, Bob. I mean, it's clear that this is all kind of a bit, what's the word here? I guess lucky. You get lucky if you avoid this in a way. But I think there's also a very clear bit of dialogue that's been going on with James Franklin and the media over the last few weeks that kind of indicates that maybe Penn State went above and beyond, not just the football program, but across the board to make sure that they didn't run into a situation like so many other Big Ten schools have had where they have to cancel a game during game week. I believe we're now down to 4 Big Ten teams that can finish its season as scheduled. That's Penn State, Iowa, Indiana, and Rutgers. I don't want to get too far into the specifics of what all this means for Ohio State, because by the time this podcast is out, Bob, the Big Ten could reschedule it, another opponent. I feel pretty good about the fact that they're going to find some way to get Ohio State a 6 game as opposed to changing the rules that say you have to play 6 to get into the Big Ten title game. So we'll see. Purdue also pausing practices. So maybe we get an Ohio State Indiana rematch. Maybe we get something else. I don't know. But yeah, I do think it says a lot about the Penn State program that they were able to overcome all of this so far and not run into any problems. And let's be honest, Bob, this could be the last week we see Penn State football in 2020. James Franklin was, I believe you wrote about this in your takeaways, but he was direct about the fact that there's been no clarity, nothing really from the Big Ten Conference about what they're going to do with these crossover games. And I get it. They're trying to avoid rematches, and they don't even know their Week 8 schedule yet. The Week 8 schedule is up in the air on Tuesday. So I do understand why there's no specifics, but I can't imagine Michigan's going to be able to come back from this COVID problem they're having and be ready to play a game next week. Purdue could be in the same boat. Some other teams could be by that time as well. Who knows? So part of me just wonders if they might just nix this whole idea of a crossover Champions Week. But the problem they're going to run into if they do that, and James Franklin alluded to it, is they told TV they would do it. So they're going to have to give some of that money back, I would think, if they don't end up playing as many games as they possibly can. So there's a lot of things to figure out here, Bob. I don't know if this will be the last week for Penn State. If you made me bet, I would gun the head. I would say they do play next week, but who knows when, where, and why.
Yeah, I mean, this thing, plans changed. The Big Ten's changed their mind a lot since this started. But they went from having no season and not revisiting their decision to revisiting their decision and having an 8-game regular season. And when that was kind of announced, I believe, in September, they came up with this vision of Champions Week, where not only would there be a Big Ten championship game, after the 8-week regular season. But in theory, if everything, I think, was handled well and everyone was healthy, they wanted to get a 9th game for every other team, and it would be a crossover game, East versus West, with an emphasis on trying to avoid rematches when, if possible. But I mean, clearly, Greg, that's not going to be. It's not going to be possible, I think, to do it in its entirety. I think you're right. I mean, I would not be surprised if Penn State receives word that there isn't going to be a 9th game for them. I would say this, though. I would bet, Greg, that the Big Ten would try something like this. Maybe they're gonna try and get Ohio State into the playoff if it means they only have 5 games. If they can't get a game this week, I would imagine next week you might see. Could you see something like Ohio State playing Northwestern and maybe Indiana playing somebody, the second best team in the Big Ten West? Maybe it's Iowa. I don't know. I don't think they've played this year. But if you can't get a full smorgasbord of Big Ten games, I don't know that people really wanted to see the 7th place team in the Big Ten East play the 7th team in the Big Ten West. I don't know if there were going to be a lot of support for that, but maybe a doubleheader instead of a 9-game schedule. Do you think that would be feasible?
Yeah, I could see a triple header of sorts too. I don't think that's out of the question either.
Right.
Maybe your top 3 teams play. You play 1 game Friday night in Indy, and then 1 game Saturday afternoon, and then 1 game Saturday night. Maybe you do it that way. Or to your point, maybe you do 2 games and you do 1 Saturday morning and 1 Saturday night. TV will make this work any way they have to get the games on live. So I wouldn't worry about that. But yeah, I mean, at this point, Bob, if Penn State beats Michigan State, which I think we both expected to get to 3-5, and if Michigan's out of the question, Penn State could weasel its way into that 3rd place game potentially if things really went its way. I know win percentage is one thing, but I mean, Maryland, I think, would still be in front of them along with Indiana and, of course, Ohio State. But it's certainly interesting to think that Penn State could somehow end up in a 3v3 game, even with everything that's gone wrong this year. So who knows? The college football season in 2020 has been nothing but a ever-changing day-to-day proposition. So nothing would surprise us at this point. But Bob, with or without that game, what was your take on James Franklin's answer to the question that Corey Geiger asked him, which was, do you think a bowl game's really even worth it? Do you think it's worth the continued sacrifice? I mean, I think everyone wants the bowl practices. They understand what that means. You go win a bowl game, yada, yada, yada in a normal year, but it does make you just stop and pause for a second, Bob. Everything these guys are going through and everything these programs are going through, how much is it worth it to go to a bowl game this year, and how many teams are going to want to do it?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, Greg, I just want to say, James Franklin, if you are by any chance going to watch a replay of this video or listen to the blue-white breakdown, it was Greg Pickel, not myself, Bob Flounders, who used the term weasel with regard to Penn State getting into the 3rd place in the Big Ten East. In all sincerity, kidding aside, Greg, I think you and I had this conversation last Tuesday on the blue-white breakdown. And, when you consider really, save for maybe a couple of days stretch when it looked like there wasn't going to be a Big Ten season, James, his coaching staff, the players, support staff, medical personnel, they've all been up there by their lonesome since early June. And, to play a bowl game, it would almost have to be, first of all, I think they're canceling bowl games left and right this week, but it would almost have to be over the Christmas holidays because of the way the playoff is set up. And, even if you have practices, what do you get out of them, Greg? Because I'm sure there's going to be limitations during the pandemic place. I mean, there's not going to be physical contact. Maybe instead of practices, you just allow the teams to kind of meet and continue to develop, whether it's through meetings or coaching techniques or at a distance. But the thought of an actual practice, like a physical practice, I just don't know that makes sense, considering the way that cases are escalating nationwide. I don't know. I don't know that maybe instead of maybe instead of in the short term having them practice through the end of December, I think we talked about maybe expanding like the spring format in terms of maybe what you can do if things, with vaccines and stuff, if things can get a little bit more manageable and we can get the virus a little bit more under control. Maybe you just expand what teams can do with an extended spring. Penn State didn't have a spring too, but I just don't know. But I just don't know about actually continuing to grind after being up there since June when you're 2-5 or 3-5 or whatever you're going to be. I just don't know if it makes a lot of sense. You could tell James Franklin was talking about sacrifices, and when he was asked about whether the season was worth it, Greg, you could tell, he didn't want to get into personal stories about his players or maybe what they've experienced. He prefer, if they want to share it, they can do that. But he did say the thing he continues to really be affected by is just, not having his wife and 2 daughters around him. They haven't been with him since this almost started, Greg. I believe they're still down in Florida, and you could tell it's definitely tearing at him. And I think that, I think that James knows that his coaching staff and his players, it might be more important for them to be around their families during the holidays than try and focus on football.
So are you suggesting a Penn State Pitt spring game then? Is that what you're getting at?
Ooh, now we're talking. I don't know. I mean, that would be okay. I mean, I just think that, what do they get? 15 practices under a normal spring, and Penn State didn't have that. Maybe extend spring a couple of weeks, whether you start it earlier, you let them go a little bit later, and instead of 15, maybe they get 20 or 22, and with limits on, maybe in spring they don't typically, spring, the physical grind is really more for the younger players who are trying to establish themselves. You ease back on the veterans that are returning, and you use it as a development camp for incoming freshmen, and or Greg, maybe you just expand the strength and conditioning period. You just do something to give them a little bit, because you could just give them a little bit more to get ready for a proposed 2021 fall campaign. Because it's pretty clear, Greg, that whatever Penn State did to get ready for this season, it feels like they really, really emphasize player safety, player health, and it's paid dividends. Now that they don't have a lot of cases, and no one, as far as we know, has been very sick. But I think it clearly impacted the team in the first month of the season. Not to make any excuses, because they were clearly beaten in some of those games. I don't know they would have won them anyway, but I think there was a trade-off with the way they approached the season and maybe how physically ready they were.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. I mean, I don't know. We don't know if they had stricter policies in regards to having groups together, or did they start contact stuff later in other schools? I don't know. I mean, it's kind of been beat around the bush a little bit, but yeah, all told, Bob, it's obviously impressive for them to have gotten to this point and to be able to say that going into Michigan State and this week 8 game ahead of whatever is on the horizon with the postseason in week 9 and so on and so forth, that they've gotten here with some false positive tests apparently being the biggest problem they've run into since getting back on campus in June, and then starting preparations for this season for the second time in September ahead of the late October start. So yeah, obviously very impressive. We'll see. James Franklin's news conference today was really dominating by a lot of the stuff we've started with. So I know there's some other things we have to get to, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting week in the Big Ten. As we've been talking, there's a bunch of reports flying around indicating that the Big Ten is going to have some angry folks on its hands if it says that teams have to throw away 3 days of game prep and start planning for another team on Wednesday afternoon following the Big Ten athletic directors meeting on Wednesday morning. So this is about to get messy in the Big Ten. I'm sure Penn State doesn't mind being off to the side for this one, because whatever they do, it's going to make somebody unhappy and leave somebody feeling like they got the short end of the stick.
Yeah. So, Greg, let's talk a little bit more about this Michigan State game. It's senior day for Penn State. Obviously it'll be a different kind of senior day than James Franklin and his players are used to. Those are usually the games where they had the pregame ceremony where the parents are out on the field and all the seniors are kind of singled out, and they walk through the group of their teammates, and they get they kind of get there's usually 100,000 people there. There won't be any of that, with Penn State and Michigan State playing on Saturday. But I think that the players have been prepared for this. But as far as the game itself, Greg, a couple tidbits that we did learn. One thing we learned, thanks to Joe Hermit's photography at the Rutgers game, is we got some clarity on what Pat Freiermuth's issue was, what body part was ailing that forced him. I believe he has not played since the Nebraska game. We got to learn a little bit about what he's dealing with and what maybe he had surgery on, and also I don't know if there's any clarity on the situation regarding Tariq Castro-Fields, but James did talk a little bit about maybe the chances of him playing against Michigan State, and he also talked that he kind of a little bit talked about. It sounds like the other talented corner that's missed time, Keaton Ellis, he was able to play against Rutgers, but it sounds like he's either been dealing with multiple things or whatever that has been bothering him. He must have aggravated it, because that's why he missed an extended period of time too. I would think Keaton Ellis is good for the Michigan State game, but I'm just not sure if Tariq Castro-Fields is actually going to play, because James kind of leaves the door open, but sometimes he doesn't want to say too much because he doesn't want to give the other team an advantage. Based upon what he said today, Greg, do you think there's a chance we'll see Tariq?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that James Franklin said that Terry Smith told him that they feel like they're getting closer to whatever magical thing they need to have happen to get Castro-Fields back on the field. Yeah. There is a part of me that thinks that he came back and sacrificed for this season to do all the things that he had to do to get on the field. And if he wasn't close, Bob, he wouldn't have traveled and worked out before every single game since Nebraska. So there's a part of me that does think he wants to get back on the field, that he would like to play in Beaver Stadium one final time. So, I have a hard time buying into the fact that he'll play, just based on the fact that you just wonder. He looked like he's been pretty close every week. So that just makes you wonder what exactly else has to happen. But I do think that if they can get him on the field, at least for a little bit, even they will give him at least one more run at Beaver Stadium. I could see that happening. You mentioned Pat Freiermuth not listed as a part of the senior day festivities. That's been the case with guys who are likely to opt out for the NFL draft. They don't have them go through senior day stuff, but would assume that this is his last opportunity to be at Beaver Stadium as a member of the team. As you mentioned, he had a sling on at Rutgers, so whatever that season-ending surgery was has now taken place. So I guess that's good news for him as he gets ready shortly for the 2021 NFL draft. So yeah, you're right. And then with Keaton Ellis, we were all wondering why he missed so much time early in the year, because like Castro-Fields, it wasn't like he was over there in joggers. He was in his uniform, but never took the field until Castro-Fields was hurt. And James said today that he had been fighting through some injuries. So I thought that was notable. And Bob, they're happy with that corner room so far, even though the list of available players seems to be up in the air each week.
Yeah. So Freiermuth sling. If you haven't checked out Joe Hermit's Rutgers Penn State gallery on PennLive, please do so. He's been at every game but one. This year he's traveled on the road. He's been at the home games. He's done some great work for us, as he always does. But he had a couple pictures of Pat. His right elbow, arm were like immobilized in a sling, so it was something obviously to that area of his body that was affected. His last game, if this is it for Pat, and it probably definitely is, Greg. There's really no reason to come back. I think he just it's time to get paid. But he had a real nice game in the Nebraska loss. He had that long catch, did some good things. Let's just stick with the tight end room while we're at it here on the Blue-White Breakdown, because in his absence, I think Penn State's found out some stuff about two talented young tight ends. Brenton Strange is a redshirt freshman. Theo Johnson is a true freshman, probably one of the most coveted kids in the freshman recruiting class that they had. Penn State has not backed away, Greg, from the two tight end sets. They've obviously committed to trying to ground and pound, run the ball. And you're seeing a lot of both those guys. Not only, they can catch the ball, clearly, they're talented kids, but it's been rare during James Franklin's time when he's had two young tight ends that are willing and able blockers. It looks like those guys are exactly that. And I don't know if there's something from preventing Zach Kuntz from maybe playing. He's played very sparingly, doesn't have a catch this year. He's played in 4 games. But these two are clearly the guys that Penn State is leaning on in the tight end room without Pat Freiermuth. And James did acknowledge that these guys are really embracing the physical aspect of playing tight end.
Yeah, they like blocking, Bob. There's no doubt about that. And it's not that Penn State has had complete non-blockers over the last few years, but let's be honest, Mike Gesicki and Pat Freiermuth are guys that can really bash you in the passing game, and that was their strength. And Pat was probably a little bit of a better blocker than Mike Gesicki was, but both of those guys were going to be known in the future at all points in time for how they were able to run routes and go catch the ball. So Strange and Johnson certainly add a different dynamic to that. They love blocking. I think that it's very clear that they're willing and able to do it, and they have been able to help this offense get on a more even keel over the last couple of weeks. So we'll see what they can do this week. But yeah, other than that, there really weren't a whole lot of other takeaways, I didn't think, from James Franklin today, Bob. He talked about the idea that they're signing a class and going to be putting finishing touches on the class of 2021 while possibly preparing for a game. That'll obviously be unique. He mentioned that, to paraphrase what he said was they're not going to jam guys into this class at the last minute because it's a small class to begin with, because it's a small senior class that will be honored on Saturday at Beaver Stadium, and they want to save some room. He mentioned grad transfers, and I think we all kind of assume that they might be active in the transfer portal this year, and it seems like that's going to be the case. So I don't think you're going to see a ton of fireworks heading into signing day after Harrison Wallace flipped from Duke on Monday. So that's something to keep in mind. But other than that, a long press conference that didn't really have a ton of new news in it. But we'll see what happens after this week, Bob. They get a Michigan State team coming to town that doesn't currently have a starting quarterback and might not like either one of his options there. And they're historically bad on offense, and they haven't been all that great on defense.
Yeah, and still, I think they somehow beat Northwestern this year, it's just been that kind of year. Greg, I have one little nugget I would like to throw out as we kind of wind down this edition of the Blue White Breakdown, PennLive's Penn State podcast that's daily with either Greg and myself, Dave Jones and myself, or Dustin Hawkinsmith's doing a lot of heavy lifting during the week too with his morning Blue White Breakdowns. Hopefully you guys are listening or watching, rating, reviewing, telling us how horribly we got some of our picks wrong, because we deserve it. But Greg, I'm getting the feeling that there are some people on the Penn State beat that just they've had enough of Will Levis as a designated runner, and they want him to throw the ball when he's in the game just to keep defenses honest. Greg, what's the over-under on passes attempted by Will Levis against Michigan State? What would you set that over-under at?
2.5. I'll go.
Greg, I'm going under.
Okay, noted.
unless it's a blowout.
Yeah, I just think that I think that we've seen at times Kirk Shiraka tries to make the flavor of the day work, and I could see that passing option out of his runs be the flavor of the week this week. So that's why I'm maybe being a little bit aggressive there. Yeah, I mean, I get it. They obviously want, people who watch his team can see that the Penn State, for what it's worth, in like 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, 3rd and 1, teams know that they're bringing Will Levis in the run, and the offensive line's done a pretty nice job of getting enough push up front to make it irrelevant that teams know what they're going to do. So I think that's worth pointing out. But yeah, obviously I think, Penn State needs to find, I guess they tried to find out a little bit in the Iowa game what they have in Will Levis going forward. Yeah. So on Clifford's come back in now and kind of regained control of that job. But yeah, you just think at some point he might throw it. He has as many carries in last game as Kevon Lee did. If you're going to put a guy back there with no threat of throwing, why not just put a running back there and let him bulldoze people? But they seem to think Will Levis is their best option for that. It's hard to blame them based on the results. And I think Penn State fans and others might just have to live with the way they're going to use him for the rest of this year.
Agreed. I'm sure Will Levis will play quite a bit against the Spartans if the game would get out of hand, which is certainly possible. But Penn State, for whatever reason, maybe it was the quality of the opponent, they're 0-3 at Beaver Stadium, and all 3 games, they've lost by double digits. They've taken advantage, I think, of some teams that were troubled on the road. Greg, they probably should have, if they would play Nebraska again, I'm pretty convinced with the way that they're playing now, they probably will win that game. They did play that was a road game though, Greg. At home though, 0-3, double-digit losses. It feels like this game's going to snap that streak. I think the line's somewhere around 13 or 14 points. Michigan State played Ohio State last week, and it was just ugly. A lot of turnovers, a lot of penalties. Their starting quarterback, who was not the greatest quarterback in the Big Ten, I think Rocky Lombardi got hurt, so they might have to go to his backup. It does. All signs kind of point to Penn State closing out the regular season with a 3-game winning streak. But if we've learned anything this season, it's just been so unpredictable, especially in the Big Ten. Penn State's going to have to probably earn it. And one other thing before we close, Greg, Dave Jones mentioned it after the game on Saturday. I didn't really see it, and I was kind of hunting through social media and some other posts to see if anyone else noticed anything. Is Parker Washington healthy going into this game? There was some mention about him maybe kind of staying down after either a pass pattern or a blocking play. He's kind of become a big part of what Penn State's trying to do on offense, even though they're committed to the run. He had that nice touchdown against Rutgers. He had 9 catches the week before against Michigan. Are we certain that he's 100% healthy? Because James Franklin's not going to tell us if he isn't.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like he had a stinger there late in the Rutgers game. He was down on the field there. The trainers had to come out, and they went to a quick commercial break. So we'll see. I mean, my guess is that he'll be okay. Maybe not completely 100%, but I don't think there's a lot of guys who are 100% at the end of most college football season. So, yeah, I would be surprised if they're without him on Saturday, unless that injury was worse after the fact than what it looked live.
All right, I think we're just about ready to wrap this puppy up. As we continue to march forward in December, Greg, we still need to learn a couple of things about Penn State. Can they close the season with a 3-game win streak? Can they get to 3-5 after an 0-5 start? Will they play a 9th game? And will there be any bowl game consideration for the Nittany Lions if they're 4-5? If they would play a Champions Week game against an opponent, get to 4-5. If there's enough bowl games, would they even want to play in the bowl game? A couple of questions, Greg, left to answer about this Penn State team, but you and I are planning to be at Beaver Stadium on Saturday for Senior Day. Dave Jones and I will be back on the Blue White Breakdown Thursday morning to talk about, I'm sure we're going to talk about Ohio State, Michigan a little bit with Dave, but I think we could tell people now, it'll probably be tough. If there's going to be a Blue White Breakdown, it'll probably be you and I on Saturday after the game, hopefully during daylight, but it's a 3:30 kick, so that's probably impossible. So it'll be under the cover of the night. We'll be doing it probably from one of our vehicles, but we'll be happy to make that sacrifice, especially if Penn State can win.